Greetings, YouTube. This is the Garage Autonomist, and as you might imagine, I'm going to be talking now about cultural appropriation. It's a very wide subject because there's so many different elements to that term that there is no one big fleet of ideas on this. Where all the ships are sailing in the right direction. So you may have some people talking about if they're people of color or other marginalized groups in society who might talk about cultural appropriation, and they may throw out some examples, like say if someone who's not from the African American from the black diaspora, if they've decided to start rapping, it's a form of cultural appropriation. I would never agree with that. You might have it to where a musician who, like thousands of rock musicians have done roughly since the 60s, might put a sitar, as we all know the sitar, a very beautiful instrument, by the way. I love the sound. They might go ahead and have it and incorporate that into a song. Somebody might throw that out as an example of cultural appropriation. Again, I don't agree with that as an example, but that's okay. See, I can disagree with some of those kinds of examples with other people on what a cultural appropriation is and is not. I'm not going to take the argument and then throw the baby out with the bathwater, because I disagree with some of those examples. But one thing I won't do, and one thing that I definitely have an absolutist position on, is when it comes to our enemies of the alt-right and really just the right wing in general, and people who want to uphold white supremacy and racism, I won't let you guys form the narrative or form the argument of what cultural appropriation is. This little meme that you see right now is a perfect example. Some right-wing piece of shit who had lots of time on their hands made this. And as you can I'm not going to read the whole thing, but you can see what they're trying to say. This is what a cultural appropriation is, that it's a critique against desegregation. Okay, if anybody would support segregation, it would be them. No, to have a critique of cultural appropriation does not mean you're pro segregation and everybody should be in their own little cultural silos in a multicultural society that we live in. It's funny how these people are the same ones who would say something like this and would get behind something that's quote unquote funny, because it's not really funny. It's shitty humor, actually. That would get behind something like this, and yet they would be the first ones whining and complaining, most likely back in the 90s, about multiculturalism. So you have a problem with the melding of other cultures and ideas being taught in campuses across America, but when it comes to what you think a critique on cultural appropriation, what you think that is, now all of a sudden you're pro multicultural. It doesn't work that way. So shut the fuck up. No, there are certain elements about cultural appropriation that I do feel deserve critique, and that I feel deserve outright shaming of, and I think that we all know what it is. That's why so many of the pro-white supremacists and pro-racists love to are the ones that are up in arms about it, especially here in YouTube, since they're fighting so hard to want to control the narrative. What I'm going to do is I'm going to cheat just a little bit, and I want to read from Wikipedia about cultural appropriation. So just give me 1 second here. Damn it. Here we go. because it's just a passage that I think is very important. Now, this is from the Wikipedia page on cultural appropriation, and I just want to read this one thing that I think is very important. Often the original meaning of these cultural elements is lost or distorted, which means that these uses may be viewed as disrespectful by members of the originating culture, or even as a form of desecration. Cultural elements which may have deep meaning to the original culture can be reduced to exotic fashion by those from the dominant culture. When this is done, critics of cultural appropriation say that the imitator who does not experience that oppression is able to play temporarily or an exotic other without experiencing any of the daily discriminations faced by other cultures. Now, what does all that mean? Cultural appropriation, or the issue, can break down to so many different examples of what it means, and when it would be a bad thing. And a perfect example would be when you see people running around wearing the Native American war bonnet, or maybe if you go to a concert and you might see people who clay up their hair in a way that creates, I wouldn't say dreadlocks, but if anything, creates mudlocks, like the mud people who like to show up at concerts, at least as memory used to serve me, and play in the mud, and then they would sort of lock their hair up with wet mud, and they would look like the Maasai of God, no, they're not from Ethiopia. Forgetting what region the Maasai are from. Never mind. But the point that I'm making here is that an example of cultural appropriation is when you do take something that has an actual meaning. It's a symbol that means something for a particular group, and basically you costume yourself in it. I do have a problem with that form of cultural appropriation, because you're not doing it because you're embracing that culture for the rest of your life. You are not living amongst the Native American. You're not living amongst the Maasai, therefore rejecting the culture that you grew up in. You're just simply wanting to parade as someone else that you're not. I have a problem with that. That's a good example of cultural appropriation. Now, a bad example is, and I brought it up briefly, is about musicians and when people, Donald appropriating Jews and Italians, worst parts of mafia culture. Angry Bastards. Welcome, Angry Bastards. I'm a huge fan of your channel. That's an interesting point you're raising about Donald Trump's, I guess, his public mannerisms, where he's sort of acting like a mafia douche or something like that. I guess one could say that he acts that way. I don't know if he's actually come out and said that he acts that way. But yeah, I guess, to me, quite frankly, I think it's more of a New York thing. I live, because of where living here and everything, I kind of see everybody sort of being bad imitators of Italian street dudes in some way. Not everybody, but some. But going back to what I was about to say, a perfect example of what I disagree about what cultural appropriation is. I want to talk about the group Beastie Boys, because they're one of hip hop legends, in my opinion. And some people would say, well, would that be an example of cultural appropriation? Especially our enemies, on the right would love to bring them up as well and try to trip you up with that. Don't let them trip you up with that. There's a huge difference between, say, the Beastie Boys, and I think an example, I couldn't find their picture. It used to be this group called Young Black Teenagers. They were a rap group completely comprised of white dudes. And they had like dreadlocks. And they were wearing their clothes all baggy, and they were running around holding their dicks and shit when they were talking. It was just retarded. I don't know whatever happened to that group. I'm glad they're gone. But no, two completely different examples. The Beastie Boys are from New York. They were born and raised in New York City. They grew up in a time when hip hop, after being birthed in the Bronx, in the South Bronx, as it began to make its way into the hip Lower East Side, where people like Fab Five Freddy and all them would go and I can't think of his name right now. The young black artist, painter. When they would hang out on the Lower East Side, bringing dancers with them, break dancers and graffiti artists with them, and then the downtown crowd began to check them out. This sort of cultural cross-pollination, if you will, happened, and therefore people like Adam Yaw and Michael Diamond and them were like, we like this, we like hip hop, and they wanted, as artists, because they were already a punk band, they felt that they could hold their own being rappers. Thank you, Dusty 48. Jean-Michel Basquiat was friends with Fab Five Freddy, and they were part of that cultural cross-pollination. But Jean-Michel was always downtown anyway. But you know what I'm saying, right? So, they start now. Granted, the Beastie Boys did want to distance themselves from their earlier, say, public persona when they first started as a rap group, because they were kind of being bad imitators. Basquiat, yes, they were being bad imitators, if you will, of what they thought was the black stereotype. I remember that distinctly, and they even actually apologized for it. But other than that, that is not an example of cultural appropriation. I already gave you a good example, or a good example, and that would be the young black teenagers. Some would argue that Vanilla Ice was another bad example. Now, going over to Halloween, because this is usually the reason why this subject matter comes up a lot, is around this time of year. Halloween is going to come, and we're going to see once again. Hold on just for 1 second. We're going to see once again people in costumes. We're going to see once again people in costumes, wearing costumes like Vato Loco and Polka Hottie, Indian Warrior, Kung Fu, and all of these other forms of nonsense. And some people are going to see that as offensive, and they should, because what you're doing is you're costuming yourself in a stereotype that is not real. While the sombrero is a real hat that people wear, it's a hat designed to keep the sun off of your head and out of your eyes. We all know that when people are dressing up in costumes, wearing, first of all, these store-bought fake sombreros with a mustache that they didn't grow on their face, that doesn't belong to them, fake brown makeup, you're basically costuming yourself in a stereotype. Often the stereotype is seen in movies of just lazy Mexicans sitting around not working, which of course in real life is never the case. Matter of fact, a huge chunk of my life, the majority of my friends, if they were not Chicano, were indeed Mexican nationals who moved here to work. There was nothing lazy about the Mexicans I've ever known. So, let's not even begin with the Native American costumes. Polka Hottie, very popular. If not Polka Hottie, then any other kind of variation of it. You know what I'm saying? It's the squaw who's super hot, short skirt, shit that never really existed. It's just sexualizing a whole other ethnic, a women of a particular ethnic group, and that's just disgusting. So but let's face it, we talk about that stuff. We on the left, who are progressives, we who are humanitarians, and we're attacking people's fun. It shouldn't be fun to costume and wear a stereotype, even for a 3 hour period of at a party. It serves nothing. It serves no one but to get a laugh out of those who are not of the group that you're stereotyping. So when you're taking someone like this and you're basically putting on these stereotypes, what you're really doing is you're going as, if anything, a minstrel, and you're a minstrel of someone else's culture, and not even someone else's culture. I'm sorry, you're a minstrel of a stereotype, and you're playing up one. And stereotypes are lies, basically. So, that's the reason why the that's the reason why the critique exists. Okay, and that's why those of us want to attack it as much as want to attack this form or this manifestation or this element of cultural appropriation, because it's wrong, it's bullshit, and it just needs to end. And those who are on the right, and those who are reactionaries, who are doing a major form of pushback by trying to trivialize our critique, okay, simply are threatened by it. They just want things to stay the same. Okay? They just want things to stay the same, and that's why we're getting the pushback. I want to talk about now next the subject of dreadlocks, because that's an issue that came up lately because of some Marc Jacobs fashion show recently, and I think he had like a bunch of models who were mostly all white in these sort of fake dreadlock extensions. I think something else happened where I think someone else famous and white is now starting to grow these sort of stylized dreadlocks. I think Justin Bieber or something. So I think it all happened in 1 week. The Marc Jacob thing, and the Justin Bieber situation. Pardon my ignorance specifically on these two news items. It's just I purposefully didn't bother to read up on them. I just know that there was a lot of anger expressed by people of color around this. Now, I may not 100% agree with some people's ideas that dreadlocks are a black thing, and I'll tell you why. As you can see from this picture, and I'm going to start from left to right. Let's start with the Rastafarians. The Rastafarian religion helped to popularize dreadlocks, but dreadlocks did not originate with the Rastafarians. And as you see from the picture in the middle, this is a man of the Sudha religion or belief. He's Indian, but these particular people have immigrated, to different parts of the world, including Jamaica. So they came there with dreadlocks as well. But the Rastafarians were inspired by the Kenyan rebellion led by the Kikuyu. And as you can see in the picture in the lower right hand, that is a gentleman who belongs to the Kikuyu freedom fighters. This was this was around the mid to late 40s. Yes, in the 40s, as they were fighting and overthrowing their colonial masters there, and they dreaded their hair. The term dreadlocks actually comes from them because the British said how the hair was just dreadful but they were just locking their hair. And at the very top right is the god Shiva, who's worshipped by the Sudha. Now, I don't think I'm pronouncing the Sudha correctly. I should have bothered to do that, so I apologize in advance. The point here is that hair locking and dreadlocking is not solely just did not start from the continent of Africa. It certainly did not start from the Caribbean. Okay, it throughout history we know that there are early images of early European prehistoric cavemen. Their hair, it's just a natural tendency in all hair at some point to lock up if you do or don't do certain things to it, to your hair. If you just wet it in order to clean it and nothing else, there are different other methods of dreading your hair, so you can get a different kind of outcome, thinner dreadlocks. I believe you may want to start off with some sort of, I think, beeswax or some kind of wax to put in your hair so it can be stylized in a different way. Think that I had a wild hair up my ass, pardon the pun, when I was in my early 20s. I think I was going to try to dread my hair, but I changed my mind because it was just not going to grow out the way I wanted it to. It looked fucking stupid. So, on me. It doesn't look stupid on other people. But just to go back, the thing about who has the right to have dreadlocks and stuff like that is no one can be able to prove who it truly belongs to. And I'm going to tell you this right now, as much as I love black people and everything we do, we don't own the dreadlock. Sorry, it's just a human tendency, I believe, in human hair to do that. It will just come out in different textures, regardless, depending on who's trying to dread their hair, but it doesn't come from that. I mean, first of all, having dreadlocks does not mean you're Rastafarian. And Rastafaris did not start out immediately with dreadlocks. As a matter of fact, another group of people, if you want to take this all back to Jamaica, who may have been dreading their hair even before the Rastafarian movement began, and they were also highly inspired in terms of their culture, are the actual Maroons, the descendants of the escaped rebelling slaves of Jamaica. Of course, Maroons existed in other parts of the Caribbean and South America, but the escaped slaves also grew their hair out in dreads as well. So they were inspired by the dreadlocks as well as the Kikuyu of Kenya. I mean, and I can't begin to tell you the 5 upper-class African Americans that I knew in my late teens, actually, early 20s, who I was friends with, and still am friends with a few of them still, who were not who were not raised as Rastafarian, did not really embrace Rastafarianism, but hey, they flew out to Jamaica on summers and did, and went out and did the whole Nyabingi, probably not pronouncing that correctly, Nyabingi gatherings, smoked weed for days, decided it'd be cool to grow their hair in dreadlocks for the next 2 and 3 years later. And in the meantime, they still shaved their beards. They still kept their hair clean and neat, using razors around the edges. And the big thing, they still ate meat. So there was nothing Rastafarian about these black people. So if you wanted to talk about cultural appropriation, they would have to be, guilty of that, because they were not Rastafarian. They broke a lot of rules as Rastafarians, yet they just still had dreadlocks. So this whole idea about who's appropriating this and that because of a hairstyle, I disagree with wholeheartedly. So this is all I'm pretty much have to say about cultural appropriation. I'm going to put in a low bar probably after I do pick up for my kid on some way better material about the issue than than what Wikipedia has done. But I think the Wikipedia entry for cultural appropriation is just as good. Is pretty good to start with, and it just and I'm not at all mystified by the right wingers who want to act and play this act of being confused, and they're just so hurt that their racism is under attack. In regards to cultural appropriation, when all they had to do was to simply go to, of all things, Wikipedia, and just simply read and understand what it means and why some people find it offensive. But again, it's not always like it's not it's not a blanket subject that down the line we can all agree on what's offensive, what's not, what's cultural appropriation, and what isn't. So one more thing I'm going to have to say. Hold on, Dusty. Let me just read some comments here. Dusty 48. A lot of what you'll call well-meaning people are justly confused, in my opinion, because they hear a lot of different definitions of it by different people. People have different definitions and different boundaries. Exactly. The sadhus, yes, that's don't wash their hair. They get that texture. This is how people with straight or wavy hair get the moppy look to their hair. They just don't wash like the sadhus. Ace's keyboard. Exactly. Yes. Thank you, Dusty 48. Those are great points that you're raising. So, I'm very much open to any comments for this video once it is posted, once it's done processing and posting, so we can continue on the conversation. As you all know on my channel, all conversation, debate, everything is open here. Even for some of you out there who I've gone to your videos and terrorized, I'm going to put a link in the low bar of someone who really annoyed me with her video. I can't think of her name off the top of my head in regards to cultural appropriation. She identifies herself as a Hispanic, which most of my Latino friends, they would call her a Hispanic. But that would get into a whole issue that I really don't have any right to really comment on. But they, I feel like, it was even worse coming from her, that because the first thing she did was spout off all the different cultures and ethnicities that are in her family, her bloodline, but then still needed to put on this act of being so confused by the critique of cultural appropriation, and she just doesn't get it when it's like, and then of course goes on to justify people's need to play a drunk hot Indian girl. Anyway, so this is the Garage Autonomist. Thank you for listening. Thank you, Dusty 48, for participating in the conversation. I will see you all later this week with an actual produced video. Peace.